Welcome to this deep dive explainer. Today, we are jumping straight into the incredibly complex and highly reactive psychological engine that is the borderline personality disorder, or BPD mind. This is a comprehensive residency-level breakdown, so we're going deep into the internal structures, the triggers, and the clinical dynamics at play. Let's get started. Here is our roadmap. We'll start with object relations, move into attachment and mentalization, then explore affect and relationships. After that, we'll run a clinical reenactment vignette, and finally integrate our theoretical lenses. Section 1. Object Relations and BPD. Our core concept here is identity diffusion. Basically, this is the failure to stably integrate representations of the self and of others. Because the ego lacks that crucial early synthetic function, the mind simply can't merge good and bad images together. It literally fragments. Clinically, you'll see patients shifting between completely contradictory ego states from hour to hour without any core anchor. For instance, a patient might idolize your care in one session and the next day completely accuse you of being cold and monstrous with zero memory of those good feelings. For us clinicians, the implication is huge. We have to serve as that solid reality, containing these massive shifts without getting pulled into the chaos.
Now, unlike an integrated mind that can tolerate ambivalence, realizing someone can be flawed but still fundamentally good, a split representation forces the mind to categorize people, including the self, as entirely all good or all bad. There is absolutely no gray area because their defense system simply can't tolerate it.
Let's map these intrapsychic mechanisms out. Splitting actually starts as an early biological sorting mechanism in infants to protect good things from bad objects. It actively prevents love and hate from merging, which manifests clinically as wildly alternating attitudes. Think of someone living as a highly devout ascetic who simultaneously leads a destructive, impulsive, secret life without any guilt. This dynamic also births primitive idealization, where they elevate you to a flawless savior, which inevitably flips into total devaluation. They'll attack and discard you the second reality doesn't meet their absolute expectations. The clinical takeaway here, their ego needs constant strengthening and incredibly consistent boundaries.
And that brings us to the ultimate coercive defense, projective identification. Rooted in the early container and contained relationship, this isn't just your standard projection. The patient doesn't just think you're angry. Through subtle and visible interpersonal pressure, they actively force you, the clinician, to actually feel and act angry. They project their bad internal object and literally colonize your mind to fit their internal script. For example, they might launch relentless, hostile accusations until you finally lose your patience and snap. The implication? You have to contain this projected aggression without retaliating. You have to be their safe container.
Section 2. Attachment and mentalization. Underneath all that intense BPD anger lies massive attachment insecurity. We're talking preoccupied or entirely disorganized attachment patterns. When biological hypersensitivity crashes into early relational trauma, their hypervigilance is constantly scanning the room for any hint of rejection. It's a hyperactivation of the attachment system. They desperately, absolutely need closeness, but ironically, that exact closeness triggers a terrifying fear of abandonment. This fear of abandonment fatally impacts mentalization, that crucial capacity to understand that your behavior and others' behavior is driven by separate, intentional mental states. When that attachment system gets flooded by the terror of rejection, the patient instantly loses this reflective capacity. They literally cannot see that your perspective in the real world might be totally different from the terror that's dictating their mind. That reflective failure collapses into 4 distinct pathological modes. In psychic equivalence, the internal nightmare is taken as absolute external reality. If they feel you hate them, then you must actually hate them. In the teleological mode, they need extreme physical proof, like self-harm, to validate invisible emotions. Then there's the pretend mode, where they might talk endlessly, but it's completely disconnected from any real affect. And the most destructive, the alien self. This is the internalized representation of a childhood abuser that is so unbearable, the patient is forced to constantly externalize it into your mind as the therapist.
Section 3. Affect and relationships.
All this structural pathology and hyper-triggering creates a deeply toxic emotional exhaust. Most of the time, all we see is the rage. But that intense anger is actually masking a much deeper pain. Chronic emptiness, acute, crippling shame, and rapid, kaleidoscopic mood shifts. Impulsive acts and self-harm are so often misjudged as manipulation, right? But in reality, They're desperate attempts to reestablish physical boundaries at the skin level when their internal psychological walls have completely collapsed. And the neurobiology links right back to the psychodynamics. A hyperreactive HPA axis biologically hardwires the anxious, victimized self directly to the perception of you as a dangerous, persecuting object. It's this exact biological reactivity that sponsors those massive emotional cascades from seemingly microscopic triggers. This intersection creates a truly tragic relational cycle. The patient starts with idealization, viewing a partner or therapist as the absolute flawless savior. But then their razor-sharp interpersonal hypersensitivity detects a microscopic slight. This triggers extreme disappointment, which instantly flips into devaluation, throwing that once idealized person straight into the all-bad persecutor camp. Section 4. The Reenactment Cycle. Let's run a clinical vignette. To really get how this operates in real time, let's run a stress test on this psychological engine. It all starts with a microscopic interpersonal trigger. Say a partner just looks away for a second during a conversation because they're tired. That tiny shift instantly activates an archaic internal representation, the dyad of the alien self as the absolute abuser and the patient as the helpless victim. Next, the affect takes over. A massive flood of terror, severe separation anxiety, and defensive rage completely strips away the patient's mentalization. Unable to rationally separate intention from reality, their mind falls back on that coercive defense we talked about, projective identification. Unconsciously, they force their partner to contain the bad object they simply cannot tolerate inside themselves. This drives destructive behavior. The patient hurls hostile accusations like, "You're selfish, you never cared about me." By colonizing their partner's mind, they aggressively provoke the partner into getting angry, getting defensive, and ultimately withdrawing from the room. And here is the real tragedy. That withdrawal perfectly confirms the patient's baseline expectation that everyone they love will eventually abandon them. Finally, Section 5. Integrated Theoretical Lenses. Our clinical telemetry clearly shows why we absolutely need all three dynamic psychiatric lenses functioning simultaneously. Kernberg's object relations lens maps the fractured identity structure, the splitting, and the intense aggression. The attachment lens explains the triggers, why hypersensitivity to closeness sets off those abandonment alarms. And the mentalization lens bridges the gap, explaining exactly why their higher cognitive functions completely collapse under emotional terror. Recognizing this countertransference is absolutely crucial so you don't repeat their trauma cycle. So I leave you with this final thought. When you're sitting in the clinic feeling cornered, falsely accused, and just totally overwhelmed by a patient's intense rage, ask yourself, are you responding to objective reality, or have you just been drafted as an actor in their projective identification script?